Hello everyone, my name is John McFarlane and I'm the President and CEO of the London Health Sciences Foundation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this exclusive virtual event on behalf of London Health Sciences Foundation. Thank you for joining us. Today we gather to celebrate all of you, our wonderful, generous, and caring donors. You are directly responsible for enabling change within our hospital. Today we will highlight how your generosity has made an impact on patient care at London Health Sciences Centre and the innovations made possible in part by you. Although we are not together in person, I'm grateful we can come together virtually this evening to recognize the generosity and kindness of all of you. I want to take a quick moment to also welcome a few special guests who are joining us today. Each are valued friends of the Foundation and key members of the LHSC family. Dr. Jackie Schleifer-Taylor, President and CEO. Dr. Ken Leslie, surgical oncologist. Dr. Stephen Welch, medical oncologist. Dr. Chris Pinn, senior translational scientist. Daniel Porplicia, clinical research coordinator. And Twee Brown, chair of the board for London Health Sciences Foundation. We also have some other special folks on the call. Shelley Baker is joining us today alongside members of the Baker family and close friends. It's great to have you with us as well. Shelley and her late husband Rick Baker established the very center we will be talking about today. Their generosity, coupled with a passion to change the standard of care for patients with pancreatic cancer, is what made this center possible. They have been the inspiration that fueled the vision of the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer, a center which has a profound effect on the lives of patients with pancreatic cancer. The impact is felt not only in our community, but also in communities around the world as new treatments and research breakthroughs are discovered and shared. Over the past 2 years, we've been faced with many challenges, but through adversity, we have prevailed together. We have come together as a community and stood strong in the face of this pandemic. I have been encouraged and overwhelmed by the unquestionable strength and character of our community on so many levels. Whether it be acts of gratitude, generous support, or simple words of encouragement, because you believe others thrive. Thank you for choosing to care. It's through donors like you that we are able to prioritize and support areas that have a big impact on patients at London Health Sciences Centre and our community, like the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. From us to you, I want to say thank you. Without donor support, none of these great initiatives or work would be possible. At times like this, we're reminded that our donors make a difference. You create the change that enables our patients to focus on what matters most, getting better. You are the difference. Today, we are pleased to highlight one of the many programs supported by our generous donors to the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. We will dive into what has been done so far, what studies and research are taking place, and what is yet to come, and ultimately, what impact the center is having on patient care right here in London. A first of its kind in Canada, the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer is improving patient outcomes and redefining the standard of care for those living with pancreatic cancer. The Baker Center is more than hope. It's a beacon of optimism, faith, and inspiration, the culmination of some of the greatest minds in medicine standing in direct defiance of one of the deadliest known cancers today. Today, we will get a first-hand glimpse from researchers and physicians on the positive impact the center and its work are having in and around our community. Before we go further, I'd like to invite Thuy Brown, Chair of the Board of the London Health Sciences Foundation, to bring remarks on behalf of the board.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to speak with you all this evening on behalf of the Foundation's board. I'd like to start by saying what an honor it is to be the board chair for the London Health Sciences Foundation. I've been part of the Foundation family for 10 years, and even after all these years, I'm still amazed by the generosity of our community. So I want to take a moment to thank you, our generous donors, who make everything we do at the London Health Sciences Foundation possible. Through your support, your care, and your time, and you are the proof of that, together there are no boundaries of what we can do next. From patients to physicians to researchers, your devotion and support of the Foundation's mission directly impacts those who need it most. Your generosity has a direct impact on the lives of patients and their families at LHSC, something that the LHSF team witnesses every day. I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors and partners who are supporting our event this evening. Presenting sponsor, Cerner. Production sponsor, Giant Creative. Transportation sponsor, Checker. Our partners, Best Western plus Lamplighter Inn, and Mike Buck at Lifford Wine and Spirits. I'd like to also recognize all new members of our Donor of Distinction Society and those who move societies. For all of our Donor of Distinction Society members, we are so thankful for all you do for and within our community. It is this kind of community support that makes real change, and it is a testament of a community coming together to help one another in times of need. Making a difference for another human being is both courageous and joy-filled, and being a donor of distinction recognizes your commitment to others, something that the Foundation values in the highest regard. To all of our donors and our difference makers, on behalf of the board, thank you. I would like now to welcome John back to introduce Dr. Jackie Schlafer-Taylor.
It is my pleasure to introduce London Health Sciences Center President and CEO, Dr. Jackie Schlafer-Taylor. While she was only recently officially appointed to her role, Dr. Schlafer-Taylor is no stranger to LHSC, having joined its executive team in 2015. Jackie brings a wealth of hospital and health system experience to this role and has a proven track record of leadership. She is an inspiring and transformative leader with a vision for both LHSC and Ontario's health system. Thus far in her trying tenure, Dr. Schlafer-Taylor has displayed strength and compassion for not only her staff and patients, but the community as a whole. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jackie Schlafer-Taylor.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. I'm happy to be here this evening on behalf of our staff and physicians, and most importantly, our patients and their families. It is my privilege to attend this important event today. As the major acute care center for London and the entire Southwest region, LHSC is dedicated to achieving the highest standards of care by putting patients at the center of everything we do. Over the past 2 years, I have continuously been inspired by the resilience and determination of our staff and physicians at LHSC. They have displayed pure perseverance and resilience. We all know the pandemic has been trying and has caused significant stress to our people and the healthcare system. And yet, our staff and community have persevered to find the strength and motivation needed to push forward to continue caring for one another amidst these difficult times. While we have battled a pandemic that should have diminished our strength, depleted our resources, and battered our resolve, I think it actually bolstered our commitment to each other to be the best that we can be. The commitment to care at LHSC has been made easier by the support of our community and donors like you. Without you, changing and exceeding the standard of care would simply not be possible. Without question, donor support is essential to helping us to develop resources to continuously improve our care and our capabilities on all fronts at LHSC. Now more than ever, this is of the utmost importance. The Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer is a great example of the change that can be ignited through donor funding. Rick and Shelley Baker saw a gap in our healthcare system and fought for change. They inspired a vision that others could implement and support for the greater good of those in need. As you'll hear from today's speakers, there is important work underway at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. That work is providing hope in the form of new diagnostic testing and personalized treatment options for patients suffering with pancreatic cancer. Through the exceptional generosity of donors, LHSC can provide this type of personalized care and world-class research to our patients, the research and care that they need when they need it the most. For this, we are truly, truly grateful. I'm incredibly proud to be part of this exceptional team here at LHSC and in a community that continues to believe in us and to support us. On behalf of London Health Sciences Centre, thank you. Thank you, thank you for your tremendous support and vision. You are making a difference. You are saving lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I am now pleased to introduce John Munn, the Director of Marketing and Communications at London Health Sciences Foundation, who will lead the keynote this evening.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here this evening conducting the interviews for our keynote presentation on the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Tonight, we will have several speakers, Dr. Stephen Welch, Dr. Ken Leslie, Danielle Proplicia, and Dr. Chris Pinn discussing the inspiration for the creation of the Baker Center, what has been accomplished thus far, the impact that has been made on patient care since its inception, and what the vision for the future looks like. I would like to invite Dr. Stephen Welch to join me now. Dr. Welch is a medical oncologist at the London Regional Cancer Program at LHSC and also the Chair of Medical Oncology and Medical Director of the Clinical Cancer Research Unit. Dr. Stephen Welch is also the Director of the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Rick Baker and the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Let's start there from the very beginning. Explain to me what pancreatic cancer is.
Sure. So to talk about pancreatic cancer, I have to talk about the pancreas, and I think a lot of people don't know what the pancreas is. So the pancreas is an organ that sits right under the chest. It's in the top part of the belly that is really important for digestion. So without a pancreas, you really don't just digest food very well. It's an awkward place to have a cancer because there are so many vital structures right next to it, and that's part of the reason why pancreatic cancer is such a tough problem. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about that. Why is pancreatic cancer such an aggressive form of cancer? So break that down for us. Sure. So, I mean, first off, pancreatic cancer will be, by 2030, the second leading cause of death from cancer in North America. That's a sobering statistic. And pancreatic cancer is not nearly as common as lung cancer, breast cancer, colon cancer, but the outcomes for anyone diagnosed with pancreatic cancer are devastating. The 5-year survival or cure rate for anyone diagnosed with pancreatic cancer is typically in the order of 10 to 20%. So again, really sobering statistics. There are a lot of reasons why, but I think part of the reason is there are really no good early warning signals from this disease. So unfortunately, half of patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, by the time anyone is aware of what's going on, it has already spread and it is an incurable situation. But to manage this disease also requires heavy-duty treatments like chemotherapy, radiation, surgery that is a very difficult surgery to go through. And I think one of the other things about pancreatic cancer that is humbling and sobering is, although we've seen lots of advances in new treatments, immunotherapy, targeted treatments, in other cancer types, in pancreatic cancer, we have very limited tools in our toolbox. So that is an area that we need to invest more energy and resources into discovery of what more we need to do for this disease. But really, those are the two things that I see that make this so challenging. No early warning signals, and the tools that we have at our disposal to treat this cancer, we need to do better.
And let's talk about those tools. Let's go even further back before the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Yeah. What did treatment, diagnosis, surgical implementations look like before the Baker Center?
Baker Center? Sure. So I think one of the real big challenges, and what I have seen some pretty impressive improvements in the short period of time Baker Center has been around, is just our coordination. One of the reasons that pancreatic cancer was so difficult is it took too long for us to make the diagnosis. From the time that somebody had symptoms to the time that people recognized that there was a problem, going through the gauntlet of tests required, it just took too long. So by the time they got to a specialist like me, if they were fortunate enough to see a specialist like me, it was already too late because the disease was so aggressive. So I think the main thing that I'm proud about with the Baker Center, it has galvanized our group, and we have restructured ourselves with a main goal to, from initial suspicion of pancreatic cancer to being seen in a multidisciplinary clinic with a plan in 2 weeks. That's our goal for every patient that we see. And we're closer and closer to that reality through the Baker Center.
Right, and we're talking about goals, we're talking about objectives to the actual center. Talk to me a bit about where this all stemmed from. Talk to me about the Baker family, and
Sure.
more specifically, talk to me about Rick Baker.
Yeah, so Rick Baker was an incredible individual. And he unfortunately was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in 2016. That typically leads to a life expectancy of months, not years. By the time, so this is again an example that by the time somebody figured out there was something wrong, he already had disease in multiple parts of his body. We typically can't cure that. So Rick Baker was a combination of tenacity and amazing amounts of resources, was an inquisitive individual, challenging the norms. Some oncologists don't like that. I thought it was fantastic. We developed a partnership in terms of dealing with his cancer. He went through multiple treatments over the course of years. So he stretched his life from what was expected to be months to 3 years, 4 years. And he traveled the globe receiving different treatments, all of which we talked about. And I think some of them worked. I think some of them maybe not so much. But he developed a great amount of experience with how other places conduct their business. And he brought that experience back to us to say, why can't London do things like this? And I didn't have a good answer for him. So I think that was the genesis of the Baker Center as a legacy to his tenacity and his spirit. We want to take as much of that to every patient diagnosed with this disease.
Right. Now, there's no doubt that the Baker family is an incredible family, and specifically, Rick, an amazing person, very generous with his time, his resources. How did this specifically come about, the Center for Excellence come about? You talked about him traveling. Talk to me a little bit about that. What was he traveling? Where was he going?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. He as I said, I think that he had the good fortune of resources that allowed him to travel to multiple centers of excellence in the United States and went to Europe. And along the way, he recognized that in most of these centers, they have centers with people's names on them. And he realized that these people they get ahead, and those centers achieve excellence with the use of philanthropy, with donor dollars. And that is something that he brought to our attention. And we then, not too soon after that, started working with the Baker family about, is this something that we can create here? And what are the things that we really need to put into play to improve the lives of patients with pancreatic cancer in our region? So that was the genesis of all of that.
Okay, so the Baker Center was just started. You guys are all excited about it. What was the original vision of the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer, and also what were the original goals that were set out?
So I think one of the goals, as I said, was to do a better job at getting patients seen by a specialist and a plan in place, and do that in a timely manner. We recognized that we were not anywhere close to doing that with doing things the way we usually do them. So that was the initial goal. And many of us felt that patients were going to the operating room to operate on a cancer that probably shouldn't have come out at that time. So I think that we took a different approach of using chemotherapy, possibly radiation before surgery, and that was a different approach. And I think that the Baker Center really helped to galvanize a multidisciplinary clinic, so all of these patients are seeing all of the specialists so that we can come up with a unique plan for each individual. Another early goal with the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer was to avail patients of genomic information. So this is something that really helped Rick Baker. Right. He had a rare abnormality in his cancer called a ROS1 fusion protein that was driving his cancer. That almost never happens in pancreatic cancer. So we have made it part of our mission to have patients have testing of their tumor to look at the unique genomic profile, the mutations that are underlying each individual pancreatic cancer. Now, unfortunately, it's fairly rare to see something unusual, but if we don't look for it, we're not going to find it. And it really helped Rick Baker, and it has helped a small number of patients that we have found since to access different therapies and improve their survival. So the addition of genomics, which is currently not funded by the province of Ontario, having the Baker Center fund that has been a game changer.
Right. Well, its inception happened 3 years ago, approximately. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot that's happened between then and now.
Yeah.
So why don't you walk us through what has been accomplished between that time, and also how has that improved patient care, patient outcomes? Sure. Walk us through that.
Yeah. So I think that I think the Baker Center in these 3 years there have been some additional items that have come on as time comes on. So in the first year, one of the things that we recognized as a barrier was our access to diagnostic equipment. So there's a particular diagnostic tool called an endoscopic ultrasound that most pancreatic cancer patients need. What we realized at the beginning was that patients were waiting 3-4 weeks, sometimes longer, for that crucial test. So there's a simple solution to that. Buy more endoscopic ultrasound and have it positioned at another hospital in our community. So we had enough doctors trained to do endoscopic ultrasound, just not enough machines. So that was a quick win. And we have now dropped those wait times considerably down. And that has helped get patients through the system faster. A key to success in these 3 years with the Baker Center has been an attention towards research and innovation. So we have a translational research coordinator funded by the Baker Center who has overseen a lot of the fantastic research that has been spawned by this. So we have an ongoing registry that all patients that are diagnosed sign up for. She helps with the genomics information, but she's been the key go-between between our scientists and our clinicians to coordinate these ongoing research projects that likely will need a few more years to bear fruit, but they are really exciting interventions that wouldn't have been possible without the Baker Center.
And you talk about the what's made possible through the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. And a lot of it comes down to personnel and
Yes.
the team.
Yes.
So in those 3 years, who has come on the team? You know, what does the team look like now?
Yeah, so the team is growing, and it's fantastic to see. So one of the initial hires was the research coordinator Danielle Porpolicia, we've added research personnel over and above Danielle. What we were able to accomplish as well, one of the hires that we were able to make is our patient health facilitator, Nancy Gregg. And I think that her position has really taken the Baker Center to another level. Because I think that we were all the way through looking for feedback from our patients. And one of the areas of feedback that we were getting, yes, we were getting patients in faster, but patients were still confused about the process and not sure who to connect with. Now we have an individual, Nancy Gregg, who has a long career in oncology nursing, who has come into this position. And she has been in a position to connect with these patients by telephone before their visit, after their visit, continue that continuity, navigate the process with them. And that has been a huge success and really helping the quality of life for patients that have this devastating diagnosis.
Right, and like that personal connection throughout the whole
Absolutely.
time.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. The Baker family gave a tremendous gift to establish this center. And it goes right back to what we were just talking about in terms of the importance of donor funding.
Yeah.
What does donor funding mean for the Baker Center?
It means everything. It is absolutely amazing to me, the degree of community support that we have seen for this. I think that most everyone in London is also amazed. To me, it isn't all that surprising. This is an amazing story that is worth supporting. There are not too many cancers as devastating as pancreatic cancer, and so the cause is obvious. But the generosity of this community, it is overwhelming to me sometimes. The responsibility then is on us to use this the right way. And the focus of attention is all on what can we do that will make the patient's journey better. And we need to invest our resources into that. So we have to think on it in a lot of different ways. In the clinic, this is where things like the patient health facilitator and reorganizing our structure and bringing in new clinical trials, that should help the patients in the present. But we also want to help patients in the future. This is why the discovery work is really, really important. So the donor dollars allow us to invest in people and in infrastructure.
You told me what donor funding means in general. What does donor funding mean to you specifically as someone directly involved in the center? You talked about Rick and you're still close with Shelley.
Yeah.
What does it mean to you?
It's touching. As an oncologist, I've devoted my life to improving the lives of patients diagnosed with cancer. That's what I do. To see the community give back in support of that mission, doing what they can to help the mission. No matter how small that donation is, no matter how large that donation is, it all matters and it's very touching. It's something that people don't have to do. But it is amazing to me, and it just it helps justify the day-to-day work that I do. But it is a sad reality that we're in a system where there are a lot of things that we think would help patients that our public health system simply can't afford. And I know there are people in the public health system that have to make tough decisions on how to spend taxpayer dollars. So the donor dollar gives us the latitude to go above and beyond. And without that, we can't do as good work as we would like. And so I think I truly appreciate the community that I live and work in, and it's very humbling.
That's great. When you distill it all, you distill everything around you, the people you work with, the Baker Center, donor funding. Right at the very end of that is time. Mm-hmm. And what you're doing is you're trying to extend the time for these patients. What is that like?
Yeah, and I think that's something that I think a lot of people have a tough time understanding what it is as an oncologist that you do, especially with, obviously we would love to cure every patient that we see, rid them of their cancer. Unfortunately, the sad reality is that we can't do that. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing to do. So the goal for a lot of patients that I see, most of the patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, unfortunately, is to buy time. And that is a worthwhile endeavor. It's buying time, but making sure that that's quality time. Improving quality of life and quantity of life, I think that we can do that, but we have to do that on a patient-by-patient basis, personalized therapy, use all the tools that we can. It's not just the scientific tools, it's our allied health, it's a coordinated approach to care, and that is very important to do for every patient, that improvement in quality of life and quantity of life. That's the mission for most of the patients that we see, and I pride myself on being able to do that.
There's no doubt that it takes a very special group of individuals to, seek to find more time for others. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's unbelievable. It really is. It's incredible work that you guys are doing. If we look at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer forward thinking from today onward, what does that look like? What do we want to achieve in the next few years? It's
an exciting future. I'm really blessed to be a part of it. But what I see in moving forward, well, clearly it's continuing to do the good work that we're already doing, and keep doing the things that we are doing. But I think that the pancreatic cancer problem is a very difficult problem. And we realize, and I think Rick Baker realized, that London, Ontario will not solve this problem. Neither will Princess Margaret in Toronto, MD Anderson in Texas, France. No one is going to solve this on their own. It requires collaboration between centers, and this is where I'm really excited that the Baker Center goes. Baker Center has allowed us to plant the flag in London, Ontario as a center of excellence in this disease that gets us noticed and allows us to collaborate and participate. And we're already doing that. And so we're going to be doing more of it. And the good work that we're doing is going to get published and highlighted, and that will lead to more. So that's a really exciting future. And I think the future also is going to be something where we are responsive. So we've already come up with ideas in the last 3 years that we hadn't really thought about necessarily at the start. The patient health facilitator is a good example of that. We got that from feedback from patients that this is something they needed. So in the future, I'm sure there are things that I can't think about right now that will be needed in the future, and we will adapt and we will respond. And I think that with the support of our community, we will be more able to deliver on future endeavors, so I think it's a really exciting time. There's a lot of work to do for this disease, and I think we've got a great team and looking forward to a bright future.
Stephen, there's no doubt you have a great team, and you know what you guys are doing is unbelievable work, and we are so happy to speak to you today. So Stephen, thank you so much. It's been informative for me. I'm sure it's been insightful for our attendees as well. So
great.
Thank
you very much. Yeah.
Just as you said, Stephen, this couldn't have been possible without the Baker family, an incredible pillar of our community. So let's take a quick glimpse into that family and where the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer all started.
Rick was a real smart man. He was quirky and kind of funny, and he always had this annoying habit of always being right. It just sometimes drive us crazy because we'd all kind of look at each other and go, yeah, he was right again.
He was the type of person that you could trust no matter what situation you were in. He was always that person that could be that rock.
We took up cycling in 2012. And when Rick catches a bug, Rick catches a bug. So we got ourselves some bikes.
He just really loved to get outside, get moving, see beautiful locations. And he saw that I started to take a liking to it. And I think when he saw that I did, he just wanted me to enjoy it as well. Something that brought us all joy.
He was losing weight and started to get some stomach and back kind of pain. He eventually got in for a CT scan, and on February 16th of 2016, he was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. It took time to digest. It took time. We had a number of sleepless nights. We thought, how are we going to tell the kids?
The only way to really describe it is shock or like numbness, and it takes some time for like it to actually settle in.
Rick Baker was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2016. Unfortunately, that is a terminal diagnosis, and the life expectancy is roughly 6 months.
He wasn't happy with the 6 to 12 months. He says, I've got to do better than this. So he began chemotherapy, which is one of the standard treatments here. And during that, we searched the world. Our doctors supported us here. Might have thought we were a little bit crazy, but Rick was resourceful, and they appreciated that, and that this was something he needed to do, wanted to do.
Rick Baker was a unique mixture of risk-taking, motivation, and resource. He came back to London with a wealth of experience of how other cancer centers do things. Soon enough, we started to talk about the creation of the Baker Center as his legacy, to bring some of what he saw to London.
They were inspired, and we started talking, and Rick said, we can do better here. We can bring better treatments to the patients here. He tried a couple more therapies, but things were getting harder and harder for him to tolerate. So everything they were trying, they had to do in such low doses that it really wasn't encouraging any kind of response. And he tried one last therapy in September 2nd of 2020, and it was too much for him, and 20 days later, we lost him.
Right now, the survival rate, 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer is 10%. And that's dismal. That's the worst of all the major cancers.
So the goals of the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer overall are to improve the lives of patients diagnosed with pancreatic cancer.
In a short period of time, we've seen a huge change in how we treat our pancreatic cancer patients and how it's improved their outcomes. Without that, initial funding, we wouldn't be where we are today. We'd still be in our old system.
Donor funding is critical to our mission and our program. I would say positions like mine would not be possible without donor funding. We also have clinical trials that are 100% donor funded, which gives the patients, increased treatment options and enhanced care pathways that really wouldn't have existed without that donor funding.
And what that also does is it allows us to attract more money. So we have several grant applications that are in right now that are matching the funds that donors have provided.
I think he'd be proud of us as a family. I think he'd tell us to keep pushing ourselves and pushing our boundaries and what we're capable of doing.
He would say, don't let it go, Shell. Stay with it, stay involved, to make it better, give people more options. Rick loved his life, and that's why he fought so hard for it. I actually couldn't have asked for a better life or a more beautiful life with him, just longer, more of it. That's all.
It is remarkable to see how the passion and determination of one family can truly make an impact for so many. I would like to now invite Dr. Ken Leslie to join me. Dr. Leslie is a general and surgical oncologist at the London Regional Cancer Program at LHSC and also the Chair-in-Chief of General Surgery. Dr. Ken Leslie is also a professor for the Division of General Surgery at Western University. Thank you, Ken, for joining us this evening. We're so happy and thankful that you were able to take some time out of your day to speak with us tonight.
Oh, we're glad to be here. It's a big event for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, I want to talk to you about being a surgeon. What is the standard of care mean to you in terms of a patient?
So surgery for pancreatic cancer used to be the mainstay, and very few patients got that operation. It's a big operation. We call it a Whipple procedure. Typically it takes us 6 or 7 hours to do the surgery, and the patients used to stay 12, 14 days in hospital. It was a really major operation. And that's our goal all the time, is to get any pancreatic cancer patient to surgery, because that gives them a chance of long-term survival. The downside is the majority are never candidates for surgery.
Well, let's talk about the patients, okay? What is it like diagnosing and treating patients that have pancreatic cancer?
So from the patient journey point of view, the majority of patients first come in to surgery. The intake is through surgery. Very few come in through the cancer clinic. And we have a program at our, what we call the CLIPS office, or the Center for Liver and Pancreatic Surgery, that helps us deal with the diagnosis and the management of the patients when they first come in. So we have a group of 3 individuals, Kim, Jane, and Candace, that work really hard to navigate that patient that first comes in with suspected cancer through their diagnostic journey and to the Baker Clinic for their treatment plan.
Okay, now you mentioned the Baker Clinic. How has the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer affected your daily role in the context of pancreatic cancer?
So a decade ago, it used to be very individual care, the surgeon or the oncologist, and very few of us working together. Now with the Baker Center, any of the treatment plans we come up for the patient is a combination of what we think is the best treatment from oncology, radiation oncology, and surgery. And we've changed greatly over the last 5 years about how we manage the patients, and it really is a group treatment plan.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You say it's a group treatment plan. There's other physicians, there's surgeons involved, researchers. What is the benefit, and how important is that collaborative effort within the context of the Baker Center for you within your role?
So I think the collaboration is, we sit down as a group every Monday and review all the cases. We review all the radiology, and as a group we get to talk about what we think is the best treatment plan. And we sit down and we don't always agree all the time, but we're able to throw things off each other and think about what the best treatment plan is for that individual patient.
And I think that is a theme that I've been hearing this evening from everyone I'm speaking with, collaborativeness. And, you know, on top of that, personalization of care and really pinpointing a specific avenue for patients. So, you know, how do you come to agree in those meetings about personalizing that journey for that patient?
So we think that all the patients should have chemotherapy and surgery and maybe radiation. We sit down and we think about the sequencing of it. So in the old days, it was always surgery, survive surgery, chemotherapy. Nowadays, we're looking much more about chemotherapy before, surgery, chemotherapy after, so that we're trying to optimize all the treatments. So it's not just about optimizing surgery, it's trying to optimize all their chemo through their journey.
Right. And in the context of being a surgeon yourself, what's that mean to you? What does time mean to you in terms of giving more time to those who need it?
So I think with our patients, with the severity of the diagnosis, time for a lot of them are limited. And we know from some of the latest work we've done is we've almost doubled the amount of time that we can give them. So the prognosis is poor, and in the old days they were lucky to get a year, and now we're getting most of them into the 2-year mark. We want to go further, and there are some that we go much further on, but compared to 5 years ago, we're definitely doubling their time with a collaborative approach and a personalized approach to that patient.
What is the future of surgical care in the context of, you know, pancreatic cancer patients, and what is forward looking in terms of that area that you work in?
Yeah, so as I said, our length of stay used to be traditionally in the 2-week or longer range.
Right.
And we've had a lot of focus on what we call pathways and post-op surgical pathways, so we standardize their care post-operatively. We talk about a lot of our quality improvement projects in the surgical ward to decrease complications and decrease length of stays. And then lastly, what we've introduced in the last 2 years is minimally invasive or laparoscopic surgery. A laparoscopic Whipple procedure is rare. There's only 3 centers in Canada that do them.
Wow.
And we've just started about 2.5 years ago, and we're probably one of the centers that do the most of them now in Canada each year. And that's decreased our length of stay.
Wow, that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
that's
so
great.
it's been a great advantage there.
Absolutely. Ken, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been extremely informative. I've learned a lot, and I know our attendees have learned a lot. So thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us tonight.
Oh, you're welcome. We're always glad to come out. I want to thank the donors personally for everything that they give us. Certainly without their donation, we wouldn't be able to provide the outstanding care that we do.
Thanks so much, Ken, and thank you so much again to our donors who are in attendance tonight. Remember, you are the reason all this is possible, and we are so, so grateful for you. Joining me next is Danielle Proplicia. Danielle is the Clinical Research Coordinator for the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer and works with the translational and clinical staff to facilitate clinical trials. Thanks so much for joining us, Danielle. Let's start off with your role at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Walk us through what your role is and how that role helps achieve the original mission that Rick set out to achieve.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. I joined the Baker Center in early 2020, just a few months after its inception. And my role is has been to help develop the clinical research program of the center and kind of provide operational support to facilitate the clinical studies all the way through their various stages. So that's everything from the clinical protocol development to patient enrollment and follow-up, as well as data analysis and study outcomes. And I had the privilege of meeting Rick and Shelley Baker just a few weeks after I started in the position and kind of go through those early discussions of the vision and goals of the center. And you know, one of the ones that stands out to me is, you know, genomics was very important to Rick Baker. And so I think he would be, very happy to know that now all patients coming through the center do receive genetic sequencing or offer genetic sequencing when they start in the program. And I think, the larger goal of the center was really to create a center of excellence here in London. And it's been really exciting to see the progress over the past 2 years and kind of as we work our way towards that.
How did meeting Rick and Shelley help you in your role? You met them very early on in your role, so how was that?
That was, I think maybe even my first week in the role. So, they're both incredibly intelligent, a little intimidating, but I think it really helped just to get an understanding of what they went through as a family and what Rick went through as a patient, and to kind of hear, how invested they are in this program and the excitement that they had to get this up and running, and their hopes for the center going forward.
What role do clinical trials play in patient care at the Baker Center?
Yes, so clinical trials I really see as sort of the driving force that keeps the field moving, and all of the current life-extending and life-saving treatments that we have today came from previously approved clinical studies. So I think it really gives the patients, access to that cutting-edge technology, and gives more options to our medical oncologists and surgeons to give more treatment options and better treatment options. And I think something that the Baker Center in particular really helped with is the integration of clinical research into the clinical care. So they're really not separate programs. I work very closely with the medical oncologists and the surgeons to kind of come up with a plan for the patients of what care plan is going to be best for them, but also what research plan is going to be best for them. What studies may benefit them, what studies are they eligible for.
And you spoke a little bit about the patients. What impact do those clinical trials have on patients?
That's a great question. So I think the impact is really just more treatment options. And I would say, the clinical trials give us a lot of information about kind of the ideal sequence and timing of these treatments, what is going to be the most efficient for them, and just really gives them more options kind of above and beyond the standard of care treatment.
So in your role, research is pivotal. It is pivotal to what you do on a daily basis. So what is going on in the world of research within the Baker Center at this given point? Trials,
Yes, great question. So I will just refer to this slide here. So this is kind of I call it our clinical research flow chart. So if a new patient is coming into the center, we have our 2 pillar studies, which are our DERIVE and our POWER studies. So our goal is to enroll all new patients coming through the center in at least those 2 trials. And then from there, we're able to kind of work with the patient based on whether they're a surgical candidate or not, to kind of find the study that's right for them based on that. So just to go into a little bit more detail about the DERIVE and POWER studies. So DERIVE in particular was an initiative started by Dr. Ken Leslie many years back now, and it actually includes all gastrointestinal sites. So it's not specific to pancreas, but we do have quite a large number of pancreatic patients enrolled in the study. And essentially it's a very large database and biobank. So we track longitudinally all kinds of variables from demographics, risk factors, pathology of the tumor, any chemo, radiation, surgery that the patients might have, and outcomes. So it gives us a really great high-level overview of the patient's journey, and I think it'll really be kind of a launching pad going forward for a number of additional studies. Having 527 patients currently enrolled gives us just really a wealth of data to come back to.
Absolutely.
The second pillar study that I wanted to mention is our POWER study. So that's an initiative started by Dr. Beckham Sidikovic and Dr. Steve Welch. And again, that's our genetic testing program. So right now we have 193 pancreatic patients enrolled. And basically it's a next generation sequencing using our OncoMind panel that gives us specific information about the patient's tumor and any mutations that might be actionable. So the goal of that study is really to determine if there's any genes that may respond better to certain treatments. And in that way, being able to give the patients and their physicians that information allows them to tailor the treatment of the patient to their specific genes. So that's really important, and an initiative that was really important to Rick.
So at the moment, you've broken down some of the numbers there, but there's over 700, patients that are enrolled right now in clinical trials.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
So is that pool of patients, what does that mean to you in terms of those patients, agreeing to, be in these trials?
Absolutely, and first and foremost, I would like to thank all of those patients that have agreed to participate, because obviously without them we wouldn't have this wealth of knowledge and data that we have now. It's one of the number one answers I get when I meet with a patient at their first visit and I say, is this study something you would be interested in? Overwhelmingly, the answer is, if it can't help me, I hope that it'll help someone else, down the road, so that they don't have to go through this. And I think that really provides, that hope and optimism that we have, some major advancements coming. And if it's not, in their lifetime, it still provides that hope that it's coming.
Now, you talked about hope and optimism briefly. Let's get a little bit more personal there, because I want to break that down a little bit. Oftentimes at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer, you're talking to patients who are in the late stages of that cancer, a cancer which we all know is devastating. For you, what effect has that had on you in terms of speaking with these patients?
Yes, so coming into this role, my background was not in oncology, so this was something that was completely new to me, the field of oncology, but also the Baker Center itself. One of my main roles is meeting patients on their first day coming to the center, so that's the day that they're getting their diagnosis, their prognosis, talking to the medical oncologists, the surgeons, and myself. So it's an incredibly overwhelming day for them, and often quite emotional. And to see that side, I think, really gives me the drive to keep finding whatever the next clinical trial that's going to provide some kind of hope and optimism. And it's really inspiring for me to see that those patients are very willing to participate in these studies, knowing that there's not necessarily a direct benefit to them, but I think they also understand the importance of moving this field forward through the clinical trials.
So very selfless in a way, these patients.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
They want to come to some type of cure or a solution for themselves, but in the end, they want to change the lives of others going through the same thing. It's unbelievable.
It really is unbelievable, yeah.
Now, earlier this evening, I was talking with Stephen, Dr. Welch, and we talked a bit about time.
Yes.
So, for these patients, what the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer is doing ultimately is trying to buy them time. What does time mean to you?
That's a difficult question. I think it's kind of finding that balance between time itself and quality of life. So I think a lot of our trials, do buy time, but I'm hoping that as we, develop these trials further, they're not only extending life, but also, the quality of life of these patients.
That's great. That's a great answer. It's a hard question to answer,
It is,
right?
yes.
Absolutely. So going back to the research, what's on the horizon for research? What are the new projects that are upcoming? Walk us through that a bit.
Sure. So we do have about 8 clinical trials that are currently open or opening imminently in the coming weeks. So I'll just walk you through a couple of them.
Absolutely.
So in terms of our active clinical studies, one study I wanted to mention is our NeoPanc-1 study. So that is a multi-center collaboration led out of Princess Margaret Hospital. There's about 8 sites participating across Canada. And essentially the idea of this study is to look at a biomarker called GATA6. So we are collecting tissue at the time of biopsies or at the time of diagnosis. The patients have a course of chemotherapy called FOLFIRINOX, and then we take another tissue sample at the time of surgery. And that, we're hoping, is going to give us some really valuable information about the role of GATA6 in a patient's response to treatment. Wow. The second study I wanted to mention is the Answer PDAC study, and that's a local initiative by Dr. Stuart Gady and Dr. Dan Bredner. And the idea of this study is looking at stereotactic ablative radiotherapy, and that is essentially a very focused high dose of radiation, and it's very novel and exciting. So it's something that's fairly new to the pancreatic disease space. It's been used in other disease sites. This is also a collaboration with the Ontario Institute of Cancer Research. So we were fortunate enough to receive a grant from the Window of Opportunities, which gave us an additional $250,000 to help run some of the imaging and blood biomarker aspects of this study. And that actually just opened, so we're very excited to start enrolling that. I kind of see that as an additional kind of treatment option for patients. And the third study that I wanted to mention that's currently open is our gut microbiome study, and that's again a local initiative led by Dr. Simon Malecki and Dr. John Lenahan. And essentially the idea of this study is to look at the role that the gut microbiome plays in how patients respond to their therapies, their cancer therapies, in particular chemotherapy. So the idea behind this is that the microbiome is full of microorganisms and bacteria, and looking at the diversity and quantity of those has been shown in previous disease sites to have a huge impact on how the patient is going to respond to chemotherapy. So for this study, we're collecting fecal samples, blood samples, and urine samples at the time of diagnosis, and then again after their 3 months of chemotherapy to see kind of how that treatment has changed the gut microbiome. And the idea of this study is actually a 3-pronged approach, with this first aspect being the observational study. There'll be some preclinical animal trials, and then the sort of third stage of this study is actually going to be a clinical study looking to do fecal transplants into patients, with the hope that this gives them better gut microbiome and immunity support when they go for chemotherapy.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, there's no doubt that there's lots of research happening at the Baker Center at the moment.
It's a very exciting time.
And you being a pivotal role within that center. Another pivotal role is obviously donors and donor funding. So, how has donor funding affected and impacted the research happening at the Baker Center?
So donor funding has been absolutely pivotal to the Baker Center, and not only does it support roles like mine, but I mean there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into developing and executing a clinical trial. So those donors play a huge role in the physical support of staff, the infrastructure, the imaging, the technology, everything that goes into those studies, and we have some studies that are completely donor funded, so they just would not have been possible without that funding. Right. So we are incredibly lucky that we have so many donors that have come forward and given to specific causes and specific studies that have really allowed us to continue.
How will donor funding help you continue really expanding research and breaking ground in new areas within pancreatic cancer treatment? How will donor funding help facilitate that?
That's a great question. So I think, a lot of the donor funding we've received has gone towards some of our pilot studies to kind of proof of concept, safety, feasibility of these studies, looking at smaller numbers of patients. But I think going forward, now that we have that seed funding and we were able to prove those proof of concept studies, that allows us to then expand into larger, potentially multi-center studies. So I think that's going to be an area where donor funding has and will continue to really help our mission at the Baker Center.
Danielle, you talked about future forward-thinking trials that will be happening. You talked about trials that are happening in the moment now. Is there anything that's imminently upcoming that you want to share with us?
Yes, absolutely. So we do have 3 studies that are opening in the coming weeks that I'd like to just chat about. So the Perk Up study is, again, a multi-center collaboration led out of Sunnybrook. And this is a study that's looking at patients who have undergone some kind of surgery to remove the tumor in their pancreas. So it's kind of been identified as an area of improvement to prescribe what's called pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy for these patients. So that basically gives a supplement that would replace the enzymes that the pancreas would naturally make to help us break down carbohydrates and fats and proteins. So this study is going to be looking at the quality of life for patients post-surgery with the involvement of this pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy. The second study I wanted to mention is a very novel study being led by Dr. Elena Svetkova, and this is looking at circulating tumor cells. So the idea here is that the tumors do shed some of their cells that kind of work their way into circulation, and it's been shown that looking at the presence and quantity of these cells can give us some really valuable information about progression and prognosis. So the idea of this study is to take samples at the time of biopsy, which will actually be taken from the portal vein. So the idea is that once these cells circulate through the body, they're actually filtered through the liver. So to take a normal blood draw from the arm, you may miss some of those samples. So when you go direct to the portal vein, we get a much more accurate number of these cells that we're hoping in the future can give us some really valuable information and hopefully guide treatment decisions in the future. The final study I wanted to mention is our GRECO2 study. And again, this is a multi-center study being led by Galera Therapeutics, and it's currently open in multiple sites in the United States and will be the first site and lead site here in Canada. And this is again, a novel study looking at stereotactic body radiation therapy. So again, a very concentrated high dose of radiation in conjunction with a new molecule called GC4711. And the idea of that molecule is that it makes the radiation safer and more effective. So it kind of has a protective effect for the tissue around the area of radiation.
Wow. Well, there's no doubt that there's a lot happening in terms of research. As I mentioned before, I don't want to miss anything. So is there anything you want to add in the context of clinical trials happening, whether it be past, now, future? What does that look like?
Sure. So I would say, this particular disease site, as we know, is in desperate need of more treatment options. And I really think that the clinical trials are how we get there. And I think the role of collaboration is also going to be something that's very important going forward. So I'm really excited to see that a lot of our studies are multi-center collaborations, and we're working closely with other centers to share our data and really work to come up with that next advancement together. And I think that the clinical research just continues to provide that progress and that hope.
And I think collaboration is one of those terms that I've been hearing throughout the evening. How important it is to collaborate between the donors, how it's important to collaborate between different medical centers across the country and around the globe, even collaboration within the context of LHSC and the Baker Center. So Danielle, it's been so great to have you here. There's no doubt that what you and the team are doing at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer is absolutely incredible. So we are so thankful for you taking the time to come and chat with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
Up next, we have Dr. Chris Pinn. Dr. Pinn is the lead translational scientist for the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer and a professor in the departments of physiology and pharmacology, pediatrics, and oncology at Western University. Dr. Pinn is also a scientist at the Lawson Health Research Institute and the Children's Health Research Institute. Welcome, Chris. We're so happy to have you here today.
Well, thank you for having me come and talk to you about this. This is great for me.
Absolutely. Chris, talk to me about your background and what your specific role is as a senior scientist for the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer.
Right. So I'm the lead scientist or translational researcher at the Baker Center. I have a PhD that was in anatomy and cell biology, but I've had essentially 30 plus years of research experience. I've had my own laboratory for the last 22 years that's based out of the Victoria Research Lab. And for the last 15 years, my lab is focused on pancreatic cancer and really the genetics and the environmental factors that fit in or that cause or lead to pancreatic cancer.
So what are the big questions that you're trying to answer in the context of pancreatic cancer that you and your team are trying to answer?
So there's a number of questions, and as I've already said, we look at both the genetics of a person, but we also look at the environmental factors, and we also look at the intersection of those two things. Right. And so the questions that are really big to the field and big to the disease is, what are the causes of pancreatic cancer? What are the first events that happen in progressing from normal to cancerous tissue? When can we actually identify those changes? And then once they've happened, how can we reverse them? Or how can we target them in a way that essentially gets rid of the cancer cells but leaves the normal tissue behind?
And what are some of the promising findings that you are finding in real time?
Well, we work on a couple of different things, and I talked about the intersection of genetics and environment. The idea there is that there is this interface that happens at the level of DNA, which is called epigenetics. And so we've realized that the way DNA is packaged in a cell, or the way that it changes in response to the environment, really has a big effect on how cancer progresses. Right. And it could be potentially a target to prevent resistance or to target these cells for death. We also have shown that there are certain pathways that are linked to cell stress. So when we think about stress in a person, that triggers a cellular response. And that can be through changes in your diet. It could be through changes or exposure to the environment that triggers this stress response. And how that stress response is activated may actually promote the initial stages in pancreatic cancer.
Okay, so there's a lot of details you guys are looking into, right?
Yep. So we have a fairly large lab. I have a picture of my lab somewhere here. So this is a picture of my lab, and as you can see, there's 11 people in the lab, and each of them has a very distinct project where they're all looking at different pathways that might be activated, different responses to therapy, different models that we use for studying pancreatic cancer. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing, and a lot of these are also collaborative projects as well.
Right, and I see lots of different, organizations that you guys are working with.
Yes, yeah. We've been funded. We've been lucky to be funded by a number of things. So these ones on the bottom, the CIHR and NSERC, those are government agencies. The Cancer Research Society is a private foundation. And then obviously we wouldn't be anywhere near where we are without the funds that we get from the Baker Center.
Well, let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah.
So donor funding, it's what we do at London Health Sciences Foundation. What is the importance of donor funding within the context of research?
It's absolutely critical for two reasons. One is, a lot of times when we go to outside agencies to try and get funds, they actually say, well, show us that there's some evidence that what you want to study is going to have an impact, or that it's the thing you should be studying. Mm-hmm. So we actually need to get some type of preliminary data or preliminary results to show this. And so what Foundation does is provide small grants for us to use. So we have these things called Catalyst grants that are small packets of $25,000 that funds a project for a year or a year and a half. And then what that allows us to do is then go to one of these national agencies and actually get significantly more funds. So I received a grant few years ago through the foundation of $25,000. And that allowed me to generate data that then I could get a grant that was over $700,000 over 5 years.
So donor funding just plays a pivotal role in so many different facets.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have evidence, like I can show evidence of some of these or examples of some of this as we go through
Right.
this
Okay.
discussion. So.
That's great. So within the context of a donor, they're giving to a specific cause that would, that's close to their heart, that they know and trust in that person that they're giving to,
Right.
to come up with some type of solution or make real change within the world. How does that make you feel that you're a part of something like that?
Well, it's a great question because from my perspective, that's one of the benefits of actually working in the hospital. As we've discussed, I'm a university professor, but my laboratory is based right within the hospital. And so the people that work with me and myself, we walk through the cancer clinic every day. And so we walk through by patients that are getting exposed to chemotherapy, that are hopefully going to one day be benefited by the things that we have in our lab. And that's a very concrete thing to see. And
Wow.
I think it teaches not just myself, but the students and the other trainees in my lab. It's a real powerful message to send to them, to say, the work you're doing that you think is just a thesis or just a fourth-year project, this could have an impact on somebody you pass by in the hall.
It's a truly human connection.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think sometimes you're like, well, laboratories and like there's, but that's incredible to hear that, even right down to the students that are working alongside of you, that they have a true impact in what they're seeing and what they're doing, right?
I was going to say also, because we work in the hospital, and one of the things that the Baker Center's allowed us to do is develop these multidisciplinary teams. So my students, and an average graduate student that would come into the lab and do a thesis, they would interact with other students, they'd interact with other professors. But my students are actually interacting with the medical oncologist, the radiation oncologist, the surgical oncologist, the gastroenterologist that are all treating these patients. They're also interacting with the nurse practitioners. They're interacting with the other clinical fellows and researchers. So it really makes for a nice, cohesive team.
Right, right. Well, there's no doubt that you're doing amazing work within the lab itself, within the trials and so on and so forth. Why don't you walk us through some of the things that you're working on that it wouldn't be possible without donor funding?
So there's a few things, and actually I can tell you because I'm the lead researcher, I don't like to just talk about the things that I'm doing. I'd like to talk about all of or as many other projects. And so, for instance, I mentioned this Catalyst grant program. So you see here that we have funded several grants, and I think that Danielle probably talked about this, but these are examples of grants that are funded specifically by the Baker Center, that are small pockets of funding that could lead to larger things. So they study things like the gut microbiome, how that might affect pancreatic cancer. And we, because of the way the system is set up, we actually are collaborating with these groups. We may provide a model, we may provide some of the tissue, we obviously can provide some of the expertise for them to carry out this, and conversely, they provide expertise to the things that we want to do as well. Right. But if we talk about this, that's locally. But what the foundation and what the Baker Center has really allowed us to do is to establish a presence in London that is both provincial, national, and actually international. And so an example of a provincial initiative is this training program that's funded by something called MyTax. And they have typically funded links between companies and academia. But this is the first example in London where we've actually used the foundation as a co-funder. And the idea behind this is it's meant to fund, and this is all matching funds, it's meant to fund trainees, to have specific, unique opportunities. And they have provided funds, they provide $300,000 in matching funds that we can use over the next 5 years to bring in 4 highly qualified individuals to then receive this unique training. Okay. And so the goals of this are really, there's threefold. One is to essentially to take the clinical data that Danielle probably talked about in her interview and try to align that with some of the molecular events that we see on a patient-specific way. we end up getting tissue, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, from patients from the tumors, and can we correlate what we see to what we see in the patients just in their patient charts. Right. We also can use these samples to dictate specific patient responses to therapy. How does an individual respond to one type of chemotherapy, because everyone responds quite differently? And then third of all, can we actually use this information as markers to say when somebody comes into the clinic, we can tell you based on what we've already done in other patients that you're going to be able to respond to therapy.
It's a very personalized
approach. It is. And it's really important, and people often think about this in a way of, we want to deliver the right therapy because we want to make sure we're curing the disease. But there's an equally important aspect of giving the right therapy. Because if you give the wrong therapy, you're essentially having this patient go through a procedure that they wouldn't normally go through, and it really affects their quality of life dramatically. You don't want to be doing that. So if we can identify the correct therapy, or even in the case of this is not the correct therapy, then that's going to have a huge effect on the way a patient can then proceed with their in the course of their treatment.
So personalized and very pinpointed, as close as you can get.
As close as we can get, and try to do this, and I'll show you how we're trying to get this. But, okay. So this is an initiative that we do, that we've been able to get funds, and we actually have 2 people already. So this is Dr. Emily Jean-Paul. She did her training in France, in Marseille, and she is now essentially the person who's overseeing this biobank that I'll talk about more. And then we also have a PhD student who does what we call computational biology. And this is essentially taking millions and millions of pieces of data from an individual's, in our case, we take it from the genetics and the molecular part, and try to make it understandable. How does this match up to what we're seeing in a patient, what we see between patients, et cetera. Right. So, and this is Ms. Fatima Musavi. So they're the first 2 individuals within this training program. It's, as I said, unique. They get to interact with all these clinicians, and we have the opportunity now to recruit 2 more individuals as well. Okay. The second thing, which is I'm really excited about, is London is a big part of this initiative that is instituted by the Ontario Institutes of Cancer Research. And this is usually based out of Toronto, and a lot of the initiatives are based out of Toronto. And so they have a really good pancreatic cancer research group there that we are now interacting with. And they have this personalized approach where they're taking tissue from patients and they want to see the response to all of these different therapies, but they're also including novel therapies. And the idea is that they want to screen a patient's sample or tumors with 3,000 different chemicals to see what the response is. This gets down to the very pinpointing of like what is actually the tumor's going to respond to. And so we, along with Kingston and Ottawa and Toronto, have this provincial program. It's only made possible that we can contribute because of the Baker funds. And so we actually obtained from this initiative $500,000 over the next 5 years to obtain samples from our patients here in London so they can be part of this study, but then also to test all of the samples that are coming in from around Ontario.
So make no mistake that donor funding really is playing a direct role.
It's not playing a direct role. It's playing an essential role, because without that, we wouldn't be able to do this.
Absolutely.
Like, if the Baker funds didn't exist, if those donor dollars didn't exist, the 2 things that I just talked about, which we're talking about over $800,000 in funding, would not have been even remotely possible.
Right.
It absolutely needed to be in place.
Right. So what type of future work is being done to really impact patient care and patient outcomes?
Well, so I've talked about these initiatives, and if you see, we talk about a biobank. So the big initiative that we are trying to oversee is essentially to develop a biobank of patient tumors right within London that we can test and that we can either inform patients who have provided that sample for or use that to predict future things. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what we call this is Defeat Pancreatic Cancer. So the idea of defining efficient approaches to treat pancreatic cancer. And as I mentioned, it's a living biobank. And so
Tell me what a biobank is.
So biobank is, traditionally a biobank is that you get samples from a whole bunch of patients, and this could be blood, it could be tissue, it could be the tumor, and you just store it. You store it, you likely or usually in a -80 freezer or a -150 freezer, and you just have it there, and then somebody may say, okay, well, we think this genetic mutation or change might be correlated to this disease, and then you have all these samples that you can go and test on. What we want to do is take that one step further and talk about a living biobank. And so what that means is we actually are going to not just have the samples, we're going to grow the samples. We're going to see how those samples do in real time to treatment. And so this is what we do. We work with the gastroenterologist. We also work with the surgeon, so we could do this from surgery. But there's a reason that we go and work with the gastroenterologist. They do a procedure called endoscopic ultrasound. And what they do in that is they sample a piece of tissue, so a piece of the tumor, or a suspected tumor. This is one of the very first things that a patient has done to them to confirm diagnosis. So if we can get that sample at that time, we essentially are getting that sample as early as possible.
Right.
And then we take that, and you can actually see, we take that sample and we bring it to the lab. It's essentially a needle biopsy, so very small piece. But then we can now take that tissue and grow it in culture. And we do two things. One is you can see on this diagram that we have these, what we call tumor organoids. We actually grow them in 3 dimensions. So they grow as little structures, and we can expand them, and then we can treat them and see how those tumor cells respond to therapy. We also take the cells that are around the tumor. So a tumor isn't just the tumor cells.
Right.
There's other things that cause those cells to respond or not respond. And so we take those as well, and then we can understand how those cells interact. So the tumor, what we call fibroblasts, those cells, how do they interact with the tumor cells to protect them? Because that knowledge will help us identify why a therapy may or may not work.
It's a lot of layers.
It is a lot of layers.
Right.
So, and I can tell you right now, so here's a couple of examples. These are 2 different patient samples. Mm-hmm. These things you see are individual cells, these circular things. So if you look at this, you can actually see, and this is over the span of 5 days, how these cells will grow. So they'll divide, they'll become more numerous, and then what will happen is you can see that they start to actually fuse over time. So this is very important about growth of the cells, because the fusion indicates that they may have properties that allow them to actually leave the tumor and go elsewhere, which means they can metastasize. And so as you can see, they start to form these balls or dense structures. But if we look at the other patient, another patient sample, these now grow vastly different. Mm-hmm. They grow as bubbles. And so you can see they don't really form these big balls as the other one do. You can almost see like these holes in the middle of them.
Right.
And so they have very different growth characteristics. So that alone would say, well, you're not going to be able to treat both of these tumors the same way. That alone will show us there's evidence that we need to take a more personalized approach. And without this knowledge, the way someone might be diagnosed, not diagnosed, but the type of treatment that might be provided is just based on can they handle this or not.
Right.
This might tell us that one sample is going to be very different than the other, so we have to have a different approach. And if you take these and you do a really, really thin section through them, and just look at how they look, and we talk about this as being their morphology. Mm-hmm. How do they look? You can see they're vastly different. One looks like little bubbles,
right,
and there's a single layer of cells around. The other one has significant structure to it. It's more like a ball. Again, that's going to tell us that they're going to have to be treated in different ways. And while we do this locally, there's large studies in the US, there's large studies in Europe that have shown that the response of these to therapy often is what you see in the patient. And so that allows us to actually take this information to the patient. The thing about this that's made it really exciting for us is that we're the only people in Canada to actually grow these at the time that we're growing from endoscopy.
Wow.
And that's one of the things that when we work with Toronto, that brings us in a unique flair of what we do. So that's great. For me, this is exciting. We can show some differences. But how do I take this information and bring it back to the patient?
Yeah, walk us through that.
Right, so right now you think, okay, I get a couple of samples and I do this and I have this information. And we also, by the way, we also look at genetics.
Right.
And so the idea of sequencing. So this just looks like mumbo jumbo, looks like a bunch of mountains. But I've pointed out, if you look through this, there's one difference between these. The one difference is there's a red peak instead of a blue peak. Now this represents DNA. And if we actually read this and translate it, this is what we see. And again, this is just the DNA sequence and the type of proteins that we make. But that one difference that we see, that one difference is a mutation that happens in 40% of all pancreatic cancers. And that's the only mutation that occurs to cause the cancer or to promote this cancer. Knowing this, again, will tell us, do we treat the patient in one way versus another? But again, we can't bring this back to the clinic because when we take this to the lab, it's not considered to be a clean environment. It's not considered to be an environment in which it's controlled enough that the information we have should go back to that patient. And so what we want to do is something a little bit, we want to actually build a facility that allows us to do this. So this is the idea. This is just the global idea of what we want to do. The idea to take a patient biopsy and essentially expand it so then we can test a whole bunch of things, a whole bunch of chemotherapies. We want to also look at the genetics behind it, and then we can feed forward to patients that come in to say, well, if you have this set of events or this set of mutations, then you should be treated this way.
Right.
But that's not going to be the power of this. The power is really going to be going back to that same patient. And you have to do this within probably about 4 to 6 months. That's the unfortunate reality with pancreatic cancer. If we can't perfect this in 4 to 6 months, then that patient won't be able to benefit from the things that we're doing.
Within the context of the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer and what you do specifically in your team, what is your main hopes for the next few years of what you can accomplish?
So if I can have that facility in place and we can actually provide feedback to patients directly within 5 years, I would be absolutely thrilled. But for me, personally, I mean, having worked with the clinicians, having seen the patients and talked to not just the patients but their families, you change your perspective. When I first started as a researcher, it was all about the next paper you publish, the next grant you get, trying to get recognition for these great discoveries. Now I'm at a point where if I can actually have an impact on patient survival and actually make a difference to those individuals, that's way more important than the next paper that gets published.
Chris, your research is instrumental in the well-being of patients at LHSC, especially those that are coming through the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. So it is incredible what you and your team are doing.
Thank you.
It really is. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I always say this, so people ask me, if I ever knew Rick Baker, and I don't. I didn't have the privilege of meeting him, but I do have the privilege of actually interacting with his wife. I've had the privilege of interacting with a number of other patients, and it always amazes me that those individuals, especially faced with something like pancreatic cancer, that they're thinking not about themselves, they're thinking about what they can do down the road. Like, unfortunately, pancreatic cancer is a death sentence. If you look at it, 95% of the people who get it, 90% of the people who get it die within a couple of years. It's a horrible disease. And yet here are these individuals who are saying, okay, well, how can I help the next group that gets this? How can I make it better for them? And to me, that just speaks volumes about the type of people that they are.
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chris. This has been super great speaking with you, and I know I can speak on behalf of the foundation and all those attending the Donor of Distinction virtual forum that we are so thankful that you've taken some time out to talk to us this evening about all the work that you guys are doing.
No, my pleasure to do this. I'm happy to talk about it anytime.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
And thank you to the rest of the speakers who joined us this evening. The Baker Center is just one example of the programs that are impacted by you, our generous donors. Without you, changing care would not be possible. I would now like to welcome back John McFarland to close out the evening.
Thank you, John, for hosting our evening. Again, thank you to all of our speakers for sharing your evening with us and all that remarkable information. As you can see, the work at the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer is already having a huge impact on patients with pancreatic cancer at LHSC and beyond. This is just the beginning of change that is possible for pancreatic cancer patients through the center. I look forward to what the future has in store for the Baker Center for Pancreatic Cancer. Your hope creates possibilities, your compassion generates strength, and your commitment builds resilience. Because you believe, others thrive. Thank you to all of you for choosing to care. Thank you for joining us for this exclusive virtual Donor of Distinction event today. We're always happy to connect with our community, even virtually, and I look forward to keeping in touch with everyone over the summer. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care.
I would like to take a moment to recognize all our Donor of Distinction donors. Your generosity is making an impact in the lives of patients and families at LHSC.